Let's talk about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. First released back in 2008, The Hunger Games is one of the most popular young adult series of the entire 21st century, with the initial trilogy of books spawning 4 massively successful movies. The popularity of the series led to a spike in the YA dystopian genre in both literature and film, although other adaptations like Maze Runner and Divergent failed to capture the same level of success. Because of these less-than-stellar blockbuster returns, the genre has slowly dwindled in popularity over the years, but it looks like The Hunger Games might start yet another YA renaissance. 10 years after the release of the final installment of the original book series, and 5 years after the release of the last film, author Suzanne Collins released The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a prequel novel set 64 years earlier that revolved around the series' main antagonist, President Coriolanus Snow. The book was received positively, and a film adaptation was quickly put into production, being released on November 17, 2023. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing said adaptation, discussing everything that I did and didn't like about it, from the changes to the source material, to the actors' performances, to the costume design. Obviously, this is my opinion, so you're more than welcome to disagree with it. Just don't be an asshole. I also want to preface this review by saying that I've only watched the movie a single time, so I obviously can't catch every little thing that happened, so if I misremembered something, do let me know. There's also going to be spoilers for both the book and the movie, so you've been warned. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. We're going to start off with a pretty in-depth look at what happens in the film, because there are some crucial differences from the novel, but feel free to skip ahead if you already know what happens. The film starts off with a flashback to the dark days of the First Rebellion, a civil war in the country of Panem between a group of rebel districts against the oppressive capital. Because of the war, citizens of the capital are starving, and Coriolanus Snow and his cousin Tigris even see people resort to cannibalism to survive. Both of Coriolanus' parents are dead, with his mother dying in childbirth and his father being killed in District 12. Years pass, and it's the 10th annual Hunger Games, a brutal event that serves as a punishment and reminder of the district's uprising against the capital, with one boy and one girl being selected from each of the 12 districts to fight to the death. The once distinguished Snow family has fallen on hard times in the aftermath of the war, but 18-year-old Coriolanus intends to change their circumstances by attending university, which he can only afford if he wins the Plinth Prize. While usually given to the best student at the academy, Dean Casca Highbottom announces that the students will now need to compete for the prize by mentoring that year's Hunger Games tributes, telling them that they must make their tributes spectacles in order to increase viewership of the grisly event. Coriolanus is assigned Lucy Gray Baird, a young girl living in District 12 who grabs the capital's attention after slipping a snake onto another girl and defiantly performing a song for the cameras. Intent on winning the Plinth Prize, Coriolanus works to earn Lucy Gray's trust, bringing her a rose from his grandmother's prize garden. To stay close to her, he follows her into a car that is transporting the tributes and is nearly attacked by them before being dumped into a cage at the Capitol Zoo. He convinces Lucy Gray to appear with him on camera, where she successfully charms him and the viewers. After being dragged out of the cage, he goes back to school, where he's reprimanded for his actions by Dean Highbottom, but commended by head game maker Dr. Volumnia Gall. Inspired by this, the other mentors begin visiting their tributes, allowing Coriolanus and Lucy Gray to get to know each other. But this moment is interrupted when another mentor, Arachne Crane, is killed by her tribute after taunting her with food. Coriolanus is unable to dwell on the matter as he has to submit an assignment to Dr. Gall, which proposes increased audience participation in the games via a donation system. She later calls him and his classmate Clemencia Dovecote to her lab, asking if they both worked on the paper as assigned. As a test, Dr. Gall tells Clemencia to retrieve the paper from a tank of snakes who won't attack those whose scent they're familiar with, but because she's never worked on the assignment, she's bitten and never seen again. All of the mentors and tributes are brought to tour the arena in advance of the games, but during the visit, a rebel bomb explodes, killing several mentors and tributes. Coriolanus is trapped underneath some of the collapsing debris, but Lucy Gray saves him. While he's recovering in the hospital, Lucy Gray performs another song on television, which wins her sympathy from the public. Breaking the rules, Coriolanus gives her some rat poison hidden in his mother's makeup compact to use during the games. Once the games start, Lucy Gray hides in the tunnels with District 12's male tribute, Jessup, while the rest of the tributes turn against one another. One tribute, Marcus, who had escaped during the bombing of the arena, is captured and strung up, eventually being put out of his misery by one of the other tributes. His mentor, Sejanus Plinth, who was originally from the districts, enters the arena to mourn him and protest the games. Coriolanus is sent in to get him, and when they're attacked by the tributes, Coriolanus kills one of them in defense. Meanwhile, Jessup, who was bitten by a bat and contracted rabies, attacks Lucy Gray, requiring her to run back into the arena and out of hiding. After Jessup is killed, Lucy Gray is attacked by a different group of tributes, but is able to escape and even kills two of them with her poison. As revenge for the death of one of the mentors, Dr. Gall decides to release her snakes into the arena, but Coriolanus secretly puts a handkerchief he had wiped Lucy Gray's tears with inside the cage, introducing her scent to them. The snakes then kill all of the remaining tributes, and Lucy Gray is declared the victor. Dean Highbottom confronts Coriolanus with evidence of his cheating and forces him to join the Peacekeepers as punishment. Coriolanus gets himself assigned to District 12 and is followed by Sejanus. Coriolanus is eventually reunited with Lucy Gray during one of her performances, and they continue their relationship. Meanwhile, Sejanus has fallen with the District 12 rebels and is funding their escape to the north. Coriolanus records Sejanus talking about his plans with a Jabberjay bird and sends it back to Dr. Gall. In spite of Coriolanus' pleas, Sejanus continues with his plan, leading to an altercation where Coriolanus shoots the mayor's daughter, but the rebels promise to keep it quiet and hide the weapons. Sejanus and the rebels are hanged for treason thanks to the recording Coriolanus had sent earlier, but believing that he's next on the chopping block, Coriolanus agrees to escape north with Lucy Gray. On their way out of District 12, Coriolanus finds the hidden weapons in a cabin and realizes that there's no other evidence tying him to the crime apart from Lucy Gray, meaning that he stands a chance of returning to the capital. He grows increasingly suspicious of her, and after she disappears, he chases after her and gets bitten by a snake, making him truly believe that she's turned on him. He shoots at her, but is unable to find her body, and after hiding the weapons, returns to District 12. He's later brought back to the capital, where he meets with Dr. Gall, who announces that she intends to train him to be a future game maker. Unaware of Coriolanus' role in Sejanus' death, the Plinths offer to pay for his university tuition, eventually taking him on as their heir and bringing the Snows back to their previous level of wealth. In my opinion, one of the film's biggest weaknesses is its depiction of Coriolanus Snow. A crucial element of the book is Coriolanus' inner monologue, as it highlights how two-faced, self-serving, narcissistic, and controlling he truly is. Although he presents himself as charming, intelligent, level-headed, and sincere to the outside world, his inner monologue makes it clear that he only does so in order to get ahead. His character also has no integrity, and is willing to do whatever is in his best interests, which I don't think translated on screen at all. I understand why that sort of narration wouldn't work for the film, but as a result, he doesn't come across as complex of a character as he could have been. While we can see the character's ambitious nature throughout the film, we don't have a full understanding of the motivations behind them, and at times he even comes across as genuinely magnanimous, instead of conniving. What's crucial to understand about Coriolanus is that he grew up being told that the Snows are better than everyone else, which creates this really interesting contrast as he's incredibly arrogant and yet also desperate, making him hold a good deal of animosity towards anyone and everyone. This is most apparent through his interactions with Sejanus Plinth. Although early on in the film he states that he and Sejanus aren't friends, his actions directly contradict that, but without any context for why, and it often feels like they're actually close friends. Coriolanus is disgusted by Sejanus' district background, while simultaneously being envious of his wealth, so their interactions are tinged with pity and also annoyance. But he continues to interact with Sejanus in the hopes that it'll serve him well in the future. It isn't until they're stationed in District 12 that Coriolanus begins to warm up to Sejanus, in large part because he has no one else. But he continues to think of Sejanus as lesser, essentially calling him a gullible fool on a mission of self-destruction. Coriolanus is constantly rationalizing his actions to himself in an attempt to absolve himself of responsibility, so when he eventually betrays Sejanus, he doesn't harbor any true remorse. He deludes himself into believing that by sending this recording to Dr. Gall, she'll just call Sejanus' parents and then he'll be out of his hair. but deep down he knows that he's effectively signed Sejanus' death warrant. Then when Sejanus is killed, although he shows some guilt, he's primarily concerned for himself, and whether or not he'll also be tried for treason. He even convinces himself that his actions were necessary, and that Sejanus was already living on borrowed time anyway, since Coriolanus had saved his life back in the arena. When Sejanus is spilling the beans, the two are having a full-blown conversation, with Coriolanus pleading for him to change his mind. As a result, Sejanus comes across as stubborn and idiotic, making Coriolanus' betrayal seem like a rational decision to the audience as well as himself. At Sejanus' hanging, they play the recording where he admits to helping out the rebels, which is something that I hate. In the book, Coriolanus' paranoia is worsening, so he's unsure if Sejanus is aware that he betrayed him, but by playing the recording, it removes that sense of doubt. This also affects Lucy Gray's interactions with Coriolanus at the end of the film, because when she asks him who the third person he killed was, his smooth response of himself doesn't work because she already knows the truth. After Sejanus is killed, Coriolanus goes through his personal belongings and finds a photo of the two of them, which I do think was a nice touch as it shows how much Sejanus trusted him. But I don't like how Coriolanus' breakdown is depicted. While he also sobs in the book, it's made clear that he's sorry for himself, not for what he's done. Instead of having him tearfully apologize to Sejanus, I feel as though his selfishness could have been better highlighted if they'd had him muttering something like, "Sejanus, you idiot, you brought this upon yourself, what was I supposed to do?" Coriolanus is an incredibly paranoid individual, in large part because he imagines himself in other people's shoes and knows that if it were him in the same scenario, he'd do whatever it took to protect himself. But this sense of paranoia isn't really present until the very end of the film, when in the books we can see it slowly building. As such, when he does betray Lucy Gray, it almost feels as though it comes out of nowhere, when it should be clear to the audience that he's been suspicious of her almost the entire time, believing that she was playing him to win the games, then using him to get back at Billy Tope, then planning on betraying him to get ahead herself. That's why when she talks about trust being more important than love, he doesn't agree, because he doesn't trust her at all. But once again, the film frames his betrayal as though she brought it upon herself, by putting the idea in his head by announcing herself as the only loose end and seemingly attacking him, setting up the idea that he had to get her before she could get him. Whereas in the novel, her distrust of him at that point is more ambiguous, and because she isn't a direct threat, his response feels more unreasonable. Coriolanus' idea of love is complete and utter devotion, tying into his narcissism, which is why he believes that he's in love with Lucy Gray, because she constantly reinforces his importance. But once she's back in District 12, this dynamic shifts, and because he can feel his control of her slipping, he begins acting out. He's incredibly possessive of her throughout the book, calling her his girl, wanting to keep her after the games, getting riled up about the idea of her being with other men, and pouting whenever he feels as though she's criticizing him. As a result, they have quite a few tiffs, with Lucy Gray often needing to convince him of her loyalty, but the relationship still grows more tense over time, which is why he's so willing to betray her at the end. In the movie, the transition is much more sudden. The depiction of the entire Snow family is rather disappointing in the film, as it doesn't properly show their fall from grace. They're supposed to be virtually penniless, with Coriolanus doing his best to hide the fact from the world out of embarrassment and pride. But we never actually feel like the situation is as dire as it is in the movie. In part, this is because Coriolanus' hunger isn't as big a part of the film, whereas in the book, he's constantly scrounging for anything to eat. I don't think the costuming helps with this wealth problem either. Even though we're told that the shirt Coriolanus wears at the beginning is one of his father's, implying that it's behind the times, he blends in seamlessly with his more wealthy classmates. I think if there'd been a tall collar, it would have made it clear that it isn't a fashionable silhouette, and also create a greater contrast to his outfit at the end of the film, which is on trend. Not to mention that the outfit overall just looks way too nice for someone with no money. Highbottom's dig at his too tight shoes is an absolutely humiliating moment for Coriolanus, but it's another instance where we're told, not shown this. Since they took the time to show him walking to school that day, why not have him show some discomfort because of his shoes, or even removing them and having bloody blisters? Besides making it clear to the audience that Highbottom isn't just saying a random thing to insult him, it would also highlight the lengths Coriolanus is willing to go for his image. Over the course of the film, both Grandmam and Tigress wear numerous flamboyant outfits, which don't feel remotely like what a struggling family would wear, especially considering the book specifically tells us that they sold their nicer things in order to survive the war. At one point in the movie, Coriolanus jokes that Tigress might be able to buy a new dress if he wins the plinth prize, and my first thought was, what do you mean she's worn a new dress in every single scene she's been in so far? Admittedly, I get it. If I was dressing Hunter Schafer, I'd want to have some fun too, but it just doesn't make sense for the character. Even though Tigress is a fashion designer, that doesn't mean that she should be wearing brand new digs constantly, especially since she's actually employed by someone else. I kind of wish we'd seen her in some kind of service uniform multiple times throughout the film, just to make it abundantly clear that she does have a job that takes up all of her time. In the novel, Tigress is the family's sole breadwinner, something that highlights the character's faith in Coriolanus as she's effectively sacrificing her own life for his. But in the movie, she's just a voice of reason, which is true to her characterization, but doesn't accurately represent their entire dynamic. However, I did think that the film did a great job of showing the progression of her and Coriolanus' relationship, with Tigress saying that he looks just like his father, as a way of making it clear that she's now aware of his cruelty and heartlessness, which is a great setup for her eventual disdain of Coriolanus in the main timeline. As for Tigress's normal attire, I would have loved to see things that felt more homemade and cobbled together, like knits or patchwork. Instead, she's constantly wearing silks, lace, and velvet with ornate trim, materials that are historically considered expensive. Grandmam's wardrobe is just as egregious, being decked out in jewelry and loud patterns. In the book, her character is shown to be nostalgic for their family's glory days, but she also isn't completely removed from their circumstances, so she wears unfashionable and dated things in the comfort of their home, but she saves her few nice articles of clothing for entertaining or going out into the city, places where she knows she'll be seen and has to make a good impression. See where Coriolanus gets it from? Grandmam's character as a whole is a shallow shell of herself, which astounds me because how can you cast Fenella Flanagan and then not use her to her full potential? In the movie, she comes across as a touch kooky, but generally supportive and caring, whereas in the book, she isn't quite as sweet. A classic old money type, she expresses disdain towards the districts, but is delusional about the Snow's current standing in society, which results in Coriolanus feeling an immense amount of pressure to succeed. When books get adapted to film, it's pretty standard for certain characters to get lost in the shuffle, but in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, these absences really feel like a loss. To start, I can't believe that they got rid of Ma Plinth. Although she still pops up in the background of a handful of scenes, with her clothing being made fun of by the other students, and comforting Sejanus after he gets out of the arena, you would have no idea how important her character is if you hadn't read the book. In the film, Sejanus comes across as the problem child, whose conflict with the Hunger Games stems from the fact that he comes from the districts himself. But in the book, it's made clear that it's because his mother's own kindness and empathy has influenced him. Ma Plinth not only makes food for all the tributes, but even brings food to Coriolanus, not out of pity, but out of genuine kindness, something that is completely foreign to Coriolanus as someone who exclusively does things for his own gain. Sejanus treated Coriolanus like his brother, and Ma Plinth treated him like a son, but he betrayed both of them. Without her inclusion, the true scale of Coriolanus' cruelty is lost on the audience. It also makes the part where they decide to make Coriolanus their heir not as impactful, as we don't see the full extent of his manipulation of the Plinths. I'm sure fans of the book will argue that all of the mentors serve a purpose, but I personally think Clemencia, Arachne, and Lysistrata are the only ones who make an actual impact on the plot, which the film seems to be in agreement with, as they're the only mentors besides Coriolanus, Sejanus, and Festus with any major lines. Arachne serves her purpose, showing how the majority of capital citizens make a mockery of the districts, with that arrogance eventually coming back to bite her. But I think Clemencia and Lysistrata fell short. Lysistrata is initially neutral towards the Hunger Games, but becomes outright sympathetic towards Jessup after he saves her in the arena bombing, which certainly isn't the case in the film, where she comes across as kind-hearted the whole time. The film brushes over all of the injuries from this event, focusing on Coriolanus, but as a result, we don't see Lysistrata become more passionate about Jessup winning. Clemencia's character is similarly affected in order to position Coriolanus in a more positive light. When they visit Dr. Gall in the film, Clemencia acts in a haughty manner, claiming that she did the vast majority of the work despite Coriolanus' objections. This is a much more blatant lie than in the book, where she says the entire class worked on the assignment and she just helped write it up and printed it. Because of this dishonesty, as well as her smug behavior, her punishment winds up feeling like she got what she deserved, instead of Coriolanus being partially responsible. In the book, Coriolanus reaches into the tank first to retrieve some of the papers, and emerges unharmed, which leads Clemencia to believe that she'll be okay. In the movie, they're deliberately told what the snakes will do before Clemencia puts her hand in the tank, so it seems nonsensical for her to put her hand in anyway. Even if she were afraid of admitting to lying, that certainly wouldn't outweigh the fear of being mauled by snakes. Because we already suspect what's going to happen, the attack is far less shocking and scary. She simply screams, falls, and goes catatonic before being dragged away. But in the book, she's writhing in pain and has colorful pus dripping from her wounds before being injected with something that turns her deathly white. The character never appears in the movie again, but in the book, we see her confront Coriolanus at the hospital, asking him why he hasn't come to visit her, or if her parents have any idea what's happened. Coriolanus, being the slimy worm that he is, makes up excuses and never mentions her to anyone in order to save himself. The tributes are one of this film's weak links, being utterly devoid of personality to the point that I struggled to care about any of their deaths. Even their introductions fell flat, something which I think could have been resolved if we'd been able to see a montage of all of them getting reaped instead of just faces on tiny screens. Besides making it easier to remember which was which, that sort of sequence could also highlight their differing personalities and make Lucy Gray's reaping all the more surprising. And I can't believe that they didn't even show the other tributes performing for Lucky, which highlighted Lucy Gray's showmanship and charisma in comparison to the rest. For time, the film reduces the actual Hunger Games to 2 days, but in the book it took place over several days, making starvation one of the biggest factors in the arena. As such, we see the tributes actually interact with one another, exchanging food, or just staying out of each other's way. But in the movie, they spend most of their time fighting. Because they're much more bloodthirsty, they come across as career types instead of clueless kids who are scared shitless. The only one who should have been acting so crazed was Reaper, since he caught rabies from Jessup, but that was completely ignored in the movie, so his shrine of fallen tributes is more poignant than it is deranged. 2 other tributes have very different outcomes in the film than they do in the book, with their roles being somewhat conflated. Dill, the tribute from District 11, simply dies from complications from tuberculosis, but in the movie, she's killed by Lucy Gray's rat poison. However, no one notices because it seems like she's just succumbed to her illness, which I actually do think was a clever choice, since it makes Lucy Gray's poisoning and Coriolanus' cheating less obvious. However, it takes away one of the other tribute storylines, Wovey from District 8. In the book, she's the one who gets poisoned by Lucy Gray, but in the film, she gets killed by Dr. Gall's snakes. Because the film set it up that Wovey reminds Lucy Gray of her cousin, something we have absolutely no context for, part of me wishes that she was still inadvertently killed by Lucy Gray. Because even if by accident, it'd show how desperate Lucy Gray was to survive, planting the seeds of doubt that would later drive Coriolanus crazy. Like I said, I actually liked that they used the poison for Dill, so I wonder if they could have had Lucy Gray accidentally sick the snakes on Wovey. Speaking of Lucy Gray's cousin, the Covey are practically non-existent in the film. I don't necessarily think that all of them needed to be expanded upon, but Maud Ivory at the very least, especially since she's theorized to be the connection between Lucy Gray and Katniss. A handful of other characters were missing from the film, like Coriolanus' peacekeeper roommates, Pluribus Bell, and a handful of professors at the academy. I don't actually mind their exclusion, because they aren't necessarily important to the actual themes of the story, but I do think their absence pointed to a larger problem the film suffered from, which is that the characters lived in a bubble. Coriolanus, who magically appears in different places, basically only ever interacts with people who drive the plot forward, which winds up making the entire world feel less developed and lived in. There are grand sweeping shots of the capital, but we don't learn anything about the people living there. Is everyone rich and eating lavishly? Are people buying furs and cars? Who knows? One thing that stood out to me was Tom Blythe and Rachel Zegler's natural chemistry, and considering the character's dynamic is the driving force behind the film, it's great to see that it actually worked out. Blythe was a solid choice for Coriolanus, but I think that the writing itself let him down. as he wasn't able to depict the character's eccentricities and nuances to their full extent, which is a shame because he definitely could have pulled it off. I know it's trendy to hate on Rachel Zegler right now, but I thought that she did a great job with the character. Lucy Gray is supposed to be a bit of a conundrum, where you can't tell what she's doing genuinely versus for her own survival. It's what makes her and Coriolanus similar in a sense. The only difference is that she still has a semblance of a moral compass, and is willing to make sacrifices for the people she loves. Coriolanus only loves himself. Her singing was also fantastic, which really shouldn't come as a surprise, and I think she did a great job at highlighting the character's on-stage persona and charm. When I initially saw the trailers for the movie, I wasn't sold on Viola Davis as Dr. Gall. Not that I thought that she wouldn't be able to capture her villainous qualities, it just felt reminiscent of other authoritative roles she's played in the past in projects like Law Abiding Citizen, Suicide Squad, and How to Get Away with Murder. The character definitely falls into that camp, but I did think it worked for the tone of the film, although admittedly, I wouldn't have minded if she was a little weirder. Like Viola Davis, Peter Dinklage has also played similar characters in the past, but for Dean Highbottom, I don't think it worked as well. Dinklage's take on the character is prickly and pessimistic, but that's about it. I was expecting to see more of a mess, an unhinged addict who was barely holding himself together under the weight of hundreds of deaths he felt responsible for. Honestly, it kind of felt like Dinklage phoned his performance in. A common criticism of the film was its pacing, and I'm inclined to agree. Although they rushed through the games by shortening the amount of time they took place, I still felt as though too much time was spent on the events happening inside the arena. It was like they had an action quota they needed to fill or something. Because they were pressed for time, several scenes in the third act were combined or skipped over entirely, which makes it feel incredibly rushed. In the book, Coriolanus spends weeks in District 12 with no idea if Lucy Gray is alive or not. But in the movie, there's no build-up at all. It literally feels like he arrives and then sees her the very next day. Their reunion is supposed to be a big deal, but it doesn't wind up playing out that way. Something that could have been easily fixed by having a montage sequence of him waking up in the barracks, mopping floors, cleaning dishes, capturing the Jabberjays, etc. Not only would that make his life in District 12 feel more real and like an actual punishment, it would also highlight the passage of time, because as it stands, it feels like he and Lucy Gray have only been together for a few weeks by the time they leave, instead of literal months. It wouldn't be a ModernGurlz movie review without talking about the costuming, and I'll admit, I was a little bit disappointed. Trish Somerville, who worked on Catching Fire, returned for the prequel, and I feel as though she was unable to distance herself from the world she'd already been a part of. A reminder that this takes place 64 years before the events in the Hunger Games, but you'd have no idea because everything looks so similar. Although the Capitol residents aren't quite as garish as they are during Katniss's time, their clothes retain similar silhouettes. Case in point, Tigress and Effie Trinket's peplum dresses. Somerville used fashions from the 1930s through the 1950s as inspiration for the film, which I think wound up making things look pretty derivative, as they used those same references the first time around. Obviously, there's a case for fashion being cyclical, as seen with the 2010s revival of the 1980s, which was a revival of the 1950s. But when dealing with a fictional world, why not have some fun? Instead of using the same references we'd already seen in the original series, I wish they'd gone even further back in time for the fashions of the Capitol. Considering the wealth disparity in Panem, in addition to the Capitol's sense of nationalism, I feel like they should have opted for a look that was totally unlike anything a person from the districts could fathom wearing. Which brings me to the lavish styles of the Gilded Age. Yes, they're incredibly dated to the modern eye, but think about what these fashions would mean in a recovering country. Not only are you wealthy enough to afford such elaborate styles, but you also don't have to do any sort of work that would be hindered by it. What's more of a status symbol than that? I'm not saying they needed to recreate the late 1800s to a T, but just imagine a version of the Capitol where women wear corsets and bustles loaded with trim, and where men wear top hats and cravats. Now doesn't that sound like a great time? I can give the costume design in District 12 a pass, even if it's more of the Great Depression styling from the other movies, because at least it makes sense considering how impoverished they constantly are. Although, I do think that Mayfair should have been wearing Capitol-esque fashions, because how else is the audience supposed to pick up on the fact that her family is more privileged than the rest? That brings me to one of my biggest issues with the costuming in the film, Lucy Gray's rainbow dress. Now right off the bat, I don't think it looks very nice. but that is the point since it's supposed to be dated, outlandish, and unattractive, making her look like a clown to allude to her performative nature. My problem is that I just don't like the references they used for the ensemble. I was envisioning what would be worn for Mexican folk dances, which often feature rich embroidery, layers of vibrant colors, and a flowy silhouette. Apart from the stays, which are distinctly European, even though Panem is in North America, the outfit doesn't reference any culture's traditional clothing, making it difficult to imagine that it was a hand-me-down. At the very least, if they were going to position the dress as her mother's performance attire, then they should have had Lucy Gray and other members of the Covey wear similar outfits when performing later on in District 12. Now, I have no issue with the loudness of the outfit, but the costuming of the rest of the tributes makes it veer into unnatural territory. Somerville dressed all of the tributes, apart from Lucy Gray, in similar retro workwear fashions that were distinctly masculine, although in the books, some of them wore dresses. As a result, Lucy Gray looks like she has a major case of main character syndrome, instead of just being a girl wearing what she considers to be her best clothes. It doesn't even make sense for all of the tributes to be wearing such similar fashions. Sure, the entire country is still recovering from the war, but that doesn't mean they all have the same environment and natural resources. Plus, if they actually had them dressed differently, it might have made it easier to tell them all apart. All in all, I think the film is a decent entry into the Hunger Games franchise. It's by no means my favorite installment, but it holds its own. However, I do think it suffered from pacing issues which negatively affected its characters, and it probably would have benefited from being a limited series instead. My biggest qualm is the film's rather positive depiction of Coriolanus Snow, when the entire point of the book is to highlight that he was always that sort of wicked person deep down. It wasn't just that he had a bad breakup and decided to take it out on everyone else. What did you think about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!